The workshop smelled of oil and metal shavings, a scent that David Chen had grown to love over the years. He wiped his hands on a rag already black with grease and stepped back to admire his work. The mining hauler's engine purred like a satisfied cat, its repairs complete. Outside the corrugated metal walls of his shop, the twin suns of Kepler 442b were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange that Earth's sunsets could never match. David had been on this colony world for 8 years now. He'd come with his wife, full of dreams about building a new life on the frontier. They were going to raise a family here, far from Earth's overcrowded cities and endless regulations. The colony needed mechanics, and David was one of the best. His wife had planned to start a school once enough families arrived. But the universe had other plans. A simple supply run had turned tragic when a dust storm rolled in faster than the forecasters predicted. Her transport never made it back. That was 3 years ago, and David still felt the hollow ache in his chest every morning when he woke up alone. He closed up the workshop as darkness fell, the overhead lights flickering to life automatically. The colony was small, just 200 souls trying to make a go of it on this distant world. Most were miners, pulling rare earth elements from the rocky hills that surrounded the settlement. A few were farmers, coaxing crops from the stubborn soil. And then there was David, keeping their machines running. His living quarters were attached to the back of the shop, a modest space that felt too large for one person. He heated up a ration pack for dinner and ate it without tasting, his mind already on tomorrow's work. 3 more haulers needed maintenance, and the water reclamation system was making a noise he didn't like. He was washing his plate when he heard the sound outside, a scraping, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across gravel. David grabbed the plasma torch he kept by the door and stepped outside carefully. The colony had walls and sensors, but you could never be too careful this far from Earth. What he found in the dim light of the street lamps made him freeze. The creature was massive, easily 4 times the size of a man, with scales that shimmered blue-black in the artificial light. It had 4 legs, a long, serpentine neck, and wings folded against its sides. Blood oozed from a wound in its shoulder, leaving a dark trail behind it. Its eyes, large and golden, fixed on David with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. David had seen the reports. Everyone in the colony had. The Draconians, as the first contact team had named them, were native to this world. They were rare, reclusive, and according to the xenobiologists, highly intelligent. The government had strict protocols about interaction. Observe, but don't interfere. Document, but don't engage. Leave them alone, and they'll leave you alone. But this one was hurt, badly, and it had come to the edge of the human settlement. It made a sound, low and rumbling, that might have been a growl or might have been something else entirely. David should have called security. That was the protocol. But he looked at that wound, at the way the creature's leg trembled with the effort of staying upright, and he saw only a living being in pain. "Okay," he said quietly, setting down the plasma torch. "Okay, let's see what we can do." The creature watched him approach with those golden eyes, wary but not hostile. David moved slowly, talking in a low, steady voice, the way he might to a frightened dog. When he was close enough to touch, he reached out carefully and examined the wound. It looked like a projectile injury, probably from one of the automated defense turrets the miners set up around their dig sites. "Someone's shot you," David said. "Idiots. You're not dangerous, are you? Just caught in the wrong place." He went back into his workshop and gathered supplies. Medical gel that worked on most carbon-based life forms. Clean cloth for bandages. A portable light so he could see what he was doing. The creature hadn't moved when he returned, just watched him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. David cleaned the wound as gently as he could. The creature flinched but didn't pull away. He applied the medical gel, which would help with both pain and infection, and wrapped the shoulder with clean cloth. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best he could do. "There," he said, stepping back. "You should probably get somewhere safe and rest. Let that heal." The creature made that rumbling sound again, and then, to David's surprise, it settled down right there in the dirt beside his workshop. It folded its legs beneath itself, tucked its wings tighter, and lowered its head. Those golden eyes closed halfway, but David got the distinct impression it was still watching him. "You want to stay here?" David asked. "I don't know if that's a good idea. People might not understand." But the creature didn't move, and eventually David went back inside. He checked on it twice during the night, and both times it was in the same position, breathing steadily, apparently asleep. He knew he should report this, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the way the creature had trusted him enough to let him help. Whatever the reason, David kept quiet. The next morning, he half expected the creature to be gone, but it was still there, looking somewhat better than it had the night before. David brought out a bowl of water, which the creature lapped at gratefully with a long, forked tongue. Then it settled back down, apparently content to remain. Over the next week, a strange routine developed. David worked on his machines during the day, and the creature rested beside his workshop. He started calling it Ember because of the way the light caught its scales, making them glow like coals. Ember's wound healed quickly with the medical gel, faster than David had expected. But more than that, something unexpected happened. David started talking to Ember. At first, it was just commentary on his work, the same kind of thing he might mutter to himself. But gradually, it became more. He talked about his wife, about the ache of losing her, about the loneliness that had become his constant companion. And Ember listened, those golden eyes fixed on him with an attention that felt almost human. David knew it was crazy. Ember couldn't understand him, not really. But it helped somehow, having someone to talk to, even if that someone was an alien creature with scales and wings. What David didn't know was that Ember understood every word. The Draconians had been watching the human colony since it was established, learning their language, studying their ways. Ember had been injured fleeing from an automated defense system and had come to the settlement hoping for the compassion these strange, two-legged creatures sometimes showed. What Ember found was more than compassion. It was connection, the beginning of something that would change everything. 2 weeks after Ember's arrival, David was working late on a particularly stubborn piece of equipment when he heard voices outside. He stepped out to find a small crowd gathered, staring at Ember. At the front was Thomas Reeves, the colony administrator, and he did not look happy. "Chen," Reeves said sharply, "what the hell is that thing doing here? Why wasn't this reported?" David felt his stomach tighten. "It was injured. I helped it. It's not causing any trouble." "Not causing trouble?" Reeves' face was red. "It's a violation of protocol. These creatures are supposed to be left alone. We have rules for a reason." "It was dying," David said, his voice hardening. "I'm not going to let something die when I can help. That's not your decision to make." Reeves turned to the 2 security officers behind him. "Get it out of here. Use tranquilizers if you have to." "No." David stepped between them and Ember. The creature had risen to its feet, wings partially spread, sensing the tension. "You're not touching it." "That's an order, Chen." "Then write me up. Fire me if you want, but you're not hurting this creature." The standoff lasted for a long moment, and David could feel his heart pounding. He had no idea why he was risking everything for an alien he'd known for 2 weeks, but something in him refused to back down. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the memory of his wife's compassion. Maybe it was just the look in Ember's eyes, the trust that had been placed in him. Finally, Reeves lowered his hand. "Fine, but it's your responsibility, Chen. Anything happens, it's on you." The crowd dispersed, and David let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He turned to Ember, who was watching him with those golden eyes, and he could have sworn he saw understanding there. Gratitude, even. "Looks like you're stuck with me now," David said softly. Ember rumbled, a sound that was almost like a purr, and settled back down beside the workshop. And for the first time since his wife died, David felt like he wasn't completely alone. 3 months passed and the routine continued. David worked, Ember rested nearby, and the colony slowly got used to the unusual sight of a draconian living among them. Some people were curious, others wary, but no one else complained after Reeves' warning. David found that Ember's presence brought him a peace he hadn't felt in years. The creature had a calming effect, and the loneliness that had been eating at him slowly began to fade. Then came the night everything changed. David was awakened from a deep sleep by a sound he'd never heard before on this colony world. A baby crying in the darkness. He sat up in bed, confused and disoriented. There were no infants in the colony. The youngest child was 5 years old. He stumbled out of bed and opened his door. The crying was coming from outside, near where Ember slept. His heart racing, David grabbed a light and went out into the night. What he found made him stop dead in his tracks. There, in a makeshift carrier beside Ember's sleeping form, was a human baby, no more than a few months old, wailing into the night. Ember's golden eyes were open now, fixed on the child with an intensity David had never seen before. The creature's whole body was tense, trembling slightly, as if something inside it was awakening. As David approached, Ember made a sound he'd never heard from the creature before. It was a roar, deep and resonant, that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. David rushed to the baby, picking up the carrier with trembling hands. The infant's cries intensified, and David's mind raced. Where had this child come from? Who would leave a baby here in the night, and why beside Ember? He looked at the creature, at the way Ember was staring at the child, and he saw something that made his blood run cold. Ember's scales were beginning to glow, a soft blue light emanating from within. The creature's eyes had changed too, becoming brighter, more intense. Power radiated from Ember in waves that David could feel in his bones. "What's happening?" David whispered, holding the crying baby close. Ember rose to full height, wings spreading wide. The creature was magnificent and terrible in that moment, a being of ancient power awakening from a long sleep. And as David watched in awe and fear, Ember's voice entered his mind for the first time, clear as crystal and old as the stars. "The child must be protected. They come for it now. We must defend." The sky above them lit up with descending ships, their hulls bearing markings David had never seen before. Alarms began blaring throughout the colony, and David understood with terrible clarity that their peaceful existence on this distant world was about to end. Whatever was happening, whatever had brought this baby here, had drawn the attention of forces far beyond their small settlement's ability to handle. But as he looked at Ember, at the power radiating from the awakened creature, David felt something unexpected. Not fear, but hope. Because whatever was coming, they would face it together. And humanity had never been good at backing down from a fight, especially when children needed protecting. The baby's cries echoed through the night as the ships descended, and David held the child tighter, standing beside his unlikely friend, ready for whatever came next. Ember's roar sounded again, a challenge to the invaders and a promise of protection. The dragon had awakened, and with it, humanity's defiance had found an unexpected champion. The first ship touched down in the open square at the colony's center, its landing thrusters kicking up clouds of red dust that glowed in the artificial lights. David clutched the baby carrier to his chest, his heart hammering as more ships descended in a coordinated pattern around the settlement. Ember stood beside him, the creature's body radiating that strange blue glow that seemed to pulse with each of the infant's cries. Through the mental connection that had suddenly opened between them, David felt Ember's thoughts, ancient and complex. The Draconians weren't just intelligent creatures native to this world. They were guardians, watchers who had protected this sector of space for longer than human civilization had existed. And this baby, somehow, was important beyond David's understanding. "What is this child?" David asked aloud, his voice barely audible over the growing commotion as colonists emerged from their homes. Air, Ember's thoughts came back, last of the Meridian line. Those who come are collectors. They take children of power, twist them, use them for conquest. We cannot allow it. The ships were opening now, ramps extending to the ground. Figures emerged, tall and thin, wearing dark armor that seemed to absorb light. They moved with eerie synchronization, spreading out through the colony with clear purpose. David counted at least 40 of them, and more ships were still descending. Thomas Reeves appeared beside David, his face pale. "Chen, what the hell is going on? My comms are going crazy. Earth Command says these ships just appeared in system. No warning, no hails. They're here for something." His eyes fell on the baby in David's arms. "Where did that child come from?" "I don't know," David said. "It was just here when I woke up. But they're here for it, aren't they?" Reeves looked at the advancing collectors, then at Ember's glowing form. "Get that child to the bunker, now. Security will hold them off while we figure this out." But Ember's thought crashed through David's mind with absolute certainty. No bunkers, no hiding. They have technology that sees through stone and steel. They will find the child wherever we place it. We must fight. David looked at the creature beside him, at the power radiating from its form. One dragon against 40 soldiers with advanced weapons? That's suicide. "Not one dragon," Ember replied. "One dragon and one human who has already proven he will not abandon those who need protection. Your species has a quality that makes you dangerous, David Chen. You do not know when you are beaten." The collectors were moving through the colony now, scanning buildings, moving with clear purpose toward David's workshop. The colony's security team, 12 people with basic weapons, formed a defensive line between them and David. It was a futile gesture, and everyone knew it. David looked down at the baby in his arms. The infant had stopped crying and was looking up at him with eyes too alert for something so young. Eyes that seemed to hold depths he couldn't fathom. And in that moment, David made a decision that would change everything. "Tell me how to fight them," he said to Ember. The Draconians' approval flooded through their connection. "The collectors fear fire and sound. Their armor is strong, but their sensors are sensitive. Overwhelm them, and stay close to me. My shield will protect you." David turned to Reeves. "Get everyone to safety. Seal the buildings. Whatever happens, don't let them take this child." "Chen, you can't fight them alone." "I'm not alone." The collectors had reached the security line now. Their leader, if that's what it was, raised a hand and spoke in a voice that sounded synthesized, artificial. "Surrender the Meridian air. Your colony will not be harmed. Resist, and you will all be eliminated." "Yeah, that's not happening," David called back. He strapped the baby carrier to his chest, securing it tightly, and grabbed a plasma torch from his workshop. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it would have to do. Ember moved forward, placing its body between David and the collectors. The creature's roar split the night, a sound so deep and primal that David felt it in his bones. The blue glow intensified, and suddenly flames erupted from Ember's mouth, a jet of white-hot fire that lit up the colony like day. The collectors scattered, their perfect formation breaking. 2 of them were caught in the flames and went down, their armor melting. The others raised weapons that hummed with energy, firing beams of purple light at Ember. The Draconian's shield flared, a dome of shimmering energy that deflected the attacks. "Now," Ember's thought crashed through David's mind. "While they focus on me." David ran, keeping low, circling around while the collectors concentrated their fire on Ember. He reached the nearest one and swung the plasma torch like a club, the tool's cutting edge slicing through the collector's armor at the joint. The creature went down with a mechanical screech. But there were so many of them. David took down 2 more before a beam caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Pain exploded through his body and he stumbled, clutching the baby carrier protectively. The infant didn't cry, just watched with those two knowing eyes. Then something unexpected happened. The colonists emerged from their buildings, armed with whatever they could grab. Miners with drilling equipment, farmers with cutting tools. Reeves himself carried a welding torch. They weren't soldiers, just ordinary people who had come to this world looking for a better life. But they saw one of their own standing against impossible odds to protect a child. And something fundamental in human nature wouldn't let them hide. "For the colony," someone shouted, and the cry was taken up by dozens of voices. The colonists charged the collectors, and suddenly the tide began to turn. The collectors were trained and equipped, but they weren't prepared for the sheer stubborn determination of humans who had decided they wouldn't back down. David saw a miner named James take down a collector with a drilling rig. He watched Elena Rodriguez, who ran the colony's greenhouse, disable another with a spray of acidic fertilizer. The colonists fought with improvised weapons and desperate courage, and slowly, impossibly, they began to push the collectors back. Ember's flames swept through the enemy ranks, the Draconian's power fully awakened now. The creature moved with devastating grace, tail sweeping soldiers off their feet, claws tearing through armor, wings buffeting attackers away. And always, Ember's shield extended to cover David and the baby, protecting them from incoming fire. Through their mental connection, David felt Ember's surprise and growing respect. The Draconian had observed humans for years, but had never seen them in combat before, had never witnessed the peculiar human ability to decide that something was worth fighting for, and then refuse to quit, no matter the odds. "Your species is insane," Ember's thought came, tinged with something that might have been approval. Wonderfully, gloriously insane. The collector's leader raised its weapon, a larger device that hummed with dangerous energy. It aimed at David, at the baby strapped to his chest. Time seemed to slow as David saw the weapon charging, saw the purple light building to a deadly intensity. He knew Ember's shield couldn't stop this. The weapon was designed to punch through energy barriers. David did the only thing he could. He turned, putting his body between the weapon and the child. If this was how he died, so be it. He'd lost his wife to this world's dangers. At least this time, he could save someone. The weapon fired. David braced for impact, but the beam never reached him. Instead, every colonist within range threw themselves forward, forming a human shield. They stood together, shoulder to shoulder, a wall of flesh and determination between the collector and the child. The beam hit them, and David heard screams of pain. 3 colonists went down, their bodies smoking, but the rest held firm, and in that moment of distraction, Ember struck. The Draconian's tail whipped around with blinding speed, crushing the collector leader and its weapon in one devastating blow. The remaining collectors hesitated, their coordination broken. And into that hesitation, the colonists pressed their advantage. More collectors fell, their numbers dwindling. Those that remained began to retreat toward their ships, firing as they went. But Ember wasn't letting them escape that easily. The dragon leaped into the air, wings spreading wide, and soared after the retreating soldiers. Flames poured from its mouth, engulfing one ship as it tried to take off. The vessel crashed back to the ground in a twisted heap of metal. David ran to the fallen colonists, his heart in his throat. 2 were dead, their sacrifice absolute, but James was still breathing, barely. Elena and others were already providing first aid, their hands moving with practiced efficiency. These were people who had faced the dangers of frontier life before. They knew how to survive. The battle was over in minutes, though it had felt like hours. The surviving collectors fled in their ships, leaving their dead behind. Ember circled overhead once, twice, then descended to land beside David, the blue glow fading from its scales. The baby, through everything, hadn't made a sound. David looked down at the infant and saw those strange eyes watching him with what seemed like understanding, like the child knew what had just happened, knew the price that had been paid. Reeves approached, his face grim. We have wounded, 2 dead. Half the colony buildings are damaged, and Earth Command is screaming for explanations. David nodded, exhaustion washing over him. His shoulder burned where the beam had grazed him, and his whole body ached. But the baby was safe. That was what mattered. What do we tell them? Reeves asked, looking at the infant. About the child. Before David could answer, Ember's thoughts filled his mind, and this time they carried a weight of ancient knowledge. The Meridian Line are peacekeepers, born once every 1,000 cycles. They grow to bridge species, to unite worlds. The collectors seek them young, before their power manifests, to corrupt them for conquest. This child appeared here because the previous Meridian foresaw the collector's plans and sent the infant to safety, to a world where a guardian waited. You knew, David said aloud, looking at Ember. You knew this child was coming. That's why you stayed. I suspected. When I was injured, I could have returned to my people for healing, but something drew me here. The universe has patterns, David Chen. Sometimes the right people are in the right place at exactly the right time. A widowed mechanic with nothing to lose and everything to give. A guardian who chose connection over isolation. Together, we are exactly what this child needs. David looked around at the colony, at the people who had fought beside him, at the scorch marks in damaged buildings and wounded fighters being tended, at the bodies of those who had given everything to protect a child they didn't know. This is going to complicate things, he said. Reeves actually laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. Complicated? Chen, we just fought off alien kidnappers with a dragon and mining equipment. Complicated doesn't begin to cover it. But you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. This is what humanity does. We protect those who can't protect themselves, even if it's insane, even if we're outgunned and outmatched. He looked at the baby, especially then. David felt the weight of what they'd just done settling on his shoulders. They had made themselves targets by protecting this child. The collectors would be back, probably with more ships, more soldiers, and who knew what other forces might come for the Meridian Air. But as he looked at Ember, at the colonists rallying despite their losses, at the child sleeping peacefully through the chaos, David felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. His wife had always believed in helping others, in standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. She would have protected this child without hesitation. So what happens now? Someone asked from the crowd. David looked at Ember, and the Draconian's thoughts came clear and strong. Now we prepare. The collectors will return with greater force, but they are not the only ones with allies. My people have been isolated too long, watching from the shadows. Perhaps it is time we stood in the light. Time we showed the galaxy what happens when dragons and humans choose to fight together. We need to contact Earth Command, Reeves said. Get proper military support out here. Do it, David agreed. But we can't just wait and hope they arrive in time. We need to fortify. Turn this colony into a fortress. And we need to understand exactly what we're protecting. He looked down at the baby. Ember, you said this child will bridge species, unite worlds. How? The Meridian Air will grow quickly, their body and mind maturing at an accelerated rate. Within months, not years. They absorb knowledge through contact, learning languages and cultures through touch. When they reach maturity, they can share thoughts across species boundaries, help civilizations understand one another. They are born diplomats, mediators, peacekeepers. They have ended wars that lasted centuries, brokered alliances between species that had never imagined cooperation was possible. And the collectors want to twist that power, David said, understanding dawning. Use it for control instead of peace. Exactly. A corrupted Meridian could force unity through domination rather than foster it through understanding. The collectors have searched for centuries for a Meridian heir young enough to mold to their purposes. They will not give up easily. David felt the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on his shoulders. But alongside it came determination. He'd lost his wife to this world's dangers. He'd lived with loneliness and grief for 3 years. But now he had purpose again. A child to protect, a friend to fight beside, a colony of people who had proven they would stand together against any threat. Then we make them regret ever coming here, David said. We show them what happens when you threaten something humans have decided to protect. We fight, we survive, and we raise this child to be everything they're meant to be. Not alone, but together. Ember's approval radiated through their connection. Around them, the colonists raised their makeshift weapons in agreement. They were just ordinary people, miners and farmers and mechanics on a distant world. But they had just proven something fundamental about humanity. When pushed, when something precious needed protecting, humans didn't calculate odds or consider surrender. They fought, with whatever they had, against whatever came. And they didn't stop until the threat was gone, or they were. The baby, as if sensing the resolution around it, made a soft, cooing sound. David looked down and saw the infant's hand reaching up. Without thinking, he offered his finger. The child grasped it with surprising strength, and David felt a jolt of connection, not unlike what he shared with Ember. In that moment, he knew the child understood the sacrifice, the determination, the promise being made. "Welcome to the colony, little one," David said softly. "You picked a hell of a place to land, but I promise you this. We'll keep you safe. We'll raise you right. And when you're ready to bridge worlds and unite species, we'll stand beside you every step of the way. That's what we do. That's what makes us human." Ember rumbled agreement, and the sound carried a promise as old as the draconian race. Guardian and guardian, human and dragon, they would protect this child through whatever came. And if the galaxy wanted to test that resolve, it would learn a hard lesson about the consequences of threatening something a human and a dragon had decided to defend together. The night sky above them was filled with stars, countless worlds spinning in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the collectors were regrouping, planning their next assault. Other forces were probably taking notice, wondering about the Meridian Air's location. The battles ahead would be fierce and the danger immense. But as David stood there, baby in his arms, dragon at his side, and colony at his back, he felt ready for whatever came next. The dragon had awakened, and with it, humanity's stubborn refusal to back down had found its perfect partner. Together, they would show the galaxy what happened when you threaten the innocent. They would teach the stars a lesson in protection, in courage, and in the kind of determination that only came from those who had nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. The rebuilding began immediately. David's workshop became the command center, its walls soon covered with maps and defensive plans. Ember's presence drew more draconians from the wilderness, creatures who had watched humanity from afar, but now came to stand beside the Guardian who had chosen to protect the Meridian Air. They arrived in twos and threes, majestic beings of various colors and sizes, each bringing their own ancient knowledge and power. The colony transformed over the following weeks. Mining equipment was repurposed into defensive weaponry. The farmers' irrigation systems were modified to create water barriers that could short out the collectors' technology. Every colonist learned to fight, turning their everyday tools into weapons. Children too young to battle became runners and medics, learning first aid and emergency procedures. David named the baby Hope because that's what the child represented. Hope for peace, hope for unity, hope that even in the darkest circumstances, something beautiful could bloom. The name was met with universal approval, and the colonists embraced their unexpected charge with fierce protectiveness. Hope grew rapidly, just as Ember had predicted. Within 2 weeks, the infant looked 3 months old. Within a month, 6 months. But it wasn't just physical growth. David could feel the child's mind expanding, absorbing knowledge through every interaction. When Elena held Hope, the child learned about plants and growing things. When James rocked the baby to sleep, Hope absorbed understanding of geology and mining. And when David worked with Hope strapped to his chest, the child learned about machines and how things fit together. But most importantly, Hope learned about humanity, about sacrifice and courage, about standing together against impossible odds, about the stubborn refusal to give up that defined the human species. These lessons, David suspected, would shape everything Hope would become. Earth Command finally responded 3 weeks after the initial attack. A military ship jumped into the system, bringing 200 Marines and enough weapons to fight a small war. Their commander, Colonel Sarah Okonkwo, was a veteran of the border conflicts and had seen her share of strange situations. But even she was taken aback by what she found on Kepler 442b. "Let me get this straight," she said, standing in David's workshop, while Ember and 3 other Draconians lounged outside. "You're protecting an alien infant that's apparently the key to galactic peace. You fought off a force of collectors with mining equipment and dragons. And now you've turned this colony into a fortress manned by farmers and mechanics." "That's about the size of it," David confirmed. He was feeding Hope, who now looked about a year old, and was watching the colonel with intense interest. "We didn't ask for this, but we're not giving up the child to anyone who wants to use them for conquest." Okonkwo looked at Hope, and the baby reached out a chubby hand toward her. Without thinking, the colonel took it, and David saw the moment of connection, the flash of understanding that passed between them. Okonkwo's eyes widened. "My God," she whispered, "I can feel it. The potential. This child could actually do what you claim. Bridge species. Unite worlds." She looked up at David. "Do you have any idea what this means? If the collectors get hold of this power, they could force half the galaxy under their control. But if Hope grows up free, learns to use this ability the right way, we could have real peace," David finished. "Not enforced, not coerced, but chosen. That's why we fight." Okonkwo nodded slowly. "Earth Command is sending more ships. This has become a priority situation. But Chen, you need to understand something. The collectors aren't the only ones who want this child. There are a dozen factions in known space who would kill to control a Meridian heir. This colony is going to become the most contested piece of real estate in the sector." "Let them come," David said simply. "We're not going anywhere." The colonel smiled, a fierce expression. "I was hoping you'd say that, because neither are we. Earth might not have dragons, but we've got something just as good. We've got Marines who are just as stubborn as you colonists." She raised her voice. "Sergeant Williams, get the defensive perimeter expanded. I want overlapping fields of fire, hardened positions, and redundant sensor nets. We're turning this colony into a fortress that even hell itself couldn't take." The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, and within days the colony's defenses had multiplied. But it was the combination of human technology and draconian power that made the real difference. Ember worked with the military engineers, helping them understand how to detect collector ships before they entered the system. The other Draconians provided aerial reconnaissance and served as mobile artillery platforms. David found himself thrust into a leadership role he'd never wanted. He wasn't a soldier or a politician. He was just a mechanic. But he was the one Hope trusted most, the one the child reached for when frightened or uncertain. And more than that, he was the one who had proven willing to stand against impossible odds for what was right. That earned respect from colonists and Marines alike. 6 weeks after the initial attack, the collectors returned. This time they brought 5 ships instead of 3, and their forces numbered in the hundreds. But they found a very different reception than they expected. The colony's defenses lit up as the ships approached, railguns firing projectiles that punched through hulls. Draconians took to the air, raining fire on the invaders, and the Marines, supported by armed colonists, held every position with grim determination. The battle raged for 6 hours. The collectors brought advanced weapons in battle-hardened troops, but they were facing humans who had something to fight for. supported by Draconians who had finally found a cause worthy of ending their isolation. The combination was devastating. David fought from the walls, Hope secure in a reinforced bunker beneath his workshop with Elena and 2 Marines to guard them. He fired a rifle that felt awkward in his hands, but his shots were guided by the same precision that let him repair complex machinery. Beside him, Reeves operated a mounted gun, his administrator's polish stripped away to reveal the fighter beneath. "They're not giving up," Reeves shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "They just keep coming." "Then we keep fighting," David shouted back. Through his mental connection with Ember, he could feel the Draconians' fierce joy in battle, the primal satisfaction of protecting those who needed protection. The dragons swooped low, scattering a group of collectors with a blast of flame, then soared up again before their return fire could strike. A collector breach team made it to the walls, climbing with mechanical precision. David shot 2, Reeves 3, but more kept coming. Then James appeared, his mining drill whirring, and pushed the remaining collectors off the wall with a roar that would have made any Marine proud. "Nobody messes with our colony," the miner bellowed. "Nobody threatens our kids." The colonists had adopted Hope as one of their own, David realized. They weren't fighting for an alien infant anymore. They were fighting for their daughter, their neighbor's child, a member of their community. That made all the difference. The turning point came when Colonel Okonkwo led a counterattack through the collectors' lines, Marines and colonists fighting side by side, supported by dragon fire from above. They reached the collector ships and planted demolition charges, destroying 2 vessels before retreating. The remaining collectors, seeing their escape routes cut off, began to surrender. The aftermath was sobering. 37 humans dead, dozens more wounded. 2 Draconians had fallen, their sacrifice honored with a ceremony that blended human and Draconian traditions. But they had won, and the collector threat was, for the moment, neutralized. Hope was 2 years old now in appearance, though only 2 months had passed since that midnight cry awakened Ember. The child could walk and talk, speaking in sentences that showed understanding far beyond apparent years. And when Hope looked at the casualties, at the people who had died protecting them, tears rolled down small cheeks. "Why did they fight for me?" Hope asked, voice small and sad. "I'm not even human." David knelt down, taking the child's hands. "They fought because you're part of this community, because you're worth protecting, and because that's what humans do, Hope. We see someone in need, someone threatened by bullies and tyrants, and we can't help ourselves. We have to stand up. We have to fight. It's who we are." "Is it always this hard?" Hope asked, "being human?" "Sometimes," David admitted, "but it's worth it. Because when we stand together, when we refuse to back down from what's right, we can accomplish impossible things. We can protect those who need protecting. We can defy forces that should crush us. We can even befriend dragons and fight beside them like we've been allies for centuries instead of weeks." Hope looked up at Ember, who had come to stand beside David. The Draconian lowered its massive head until it was level with the child's face. "Your purpose is to bridge species, little one, to help different peoples understand one another. You are seeing that process now in its rawest form. Humans and Draconians fighting together, protecting together. This is what you will bring to the galaxy, but on a larger scale. Unity born not of force, but of choice. Alliance built on respect and shared purpose." "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Hope whispered. "You don't have to be," David said. "Not alone. That's the whole point. You'll have us, humans and Draconians, and whatever other species choose to stand with you. We'll face the challenges together. And Hope, I promise you this, we'll be with you every step of the way. I lost my wife to this world. I know what it's like to face things alone, but you'll never have to experience that. You have a whole colony of stubborn humans and awakened dragons who have decided you're worth fighting for. And once humans decide something, we're damn near impossible to change." Hope hugged him then, small arms wrapping around his neck with surprising strength. David held the child close and felt the weight of responsibility settle into something more comfortable. Not a burden, but a purpose. He was a father now, in all the ways that mattered. And this colony, this strange gathering of miners and farmers and mechanics and dragons, they were a family. Colonel Okonkwo approached, her expression serious. Chen, Earth Command wants to evacuate the child. Take Hope somewhere more secure. No, David said immediately. Hope's home is here. This is where they came when they needed safety. This is where they'll stay. The collectors will be back, Okonkwo warned. Probably with more ships than we can handle. Then we'll need more allies, Ember interjected, the Draconian's thoughts reaching everyone present. The Meridian Line has friends across the galaxy, species who remember what the previous peacekeepers accomplished. I have sent word through channels that have been quiet for centuries. Help is coming. We also need to think long-term, David added. Hope is going to keep growing. In months, they'll be a teenager. In a year, maybe an adult. We need to prepare them for that. Teach them everything they'll need to know to actually bridge species and unite worlds. Combat training, diplomacy, history, culture, technology, everything. You're talking about turning this colony into a school, Reeves said. For the most important student in the galaxy? Exactly, David confirmed. And we're all going to be teachers. Everyone here has something to offer. The miners can teach resilience and working in harsh conditions. The farmers can teach patience and nurturing growth. The Marines can teach tactics and strategy. The Draconians can teach their ancient wisdom and power. And all of us together can teach what happens when different peoples choose to stand together. Hope looked around at all the faces, human and Draconian, and something shifted in the child's expression. Understanding bloomed there, a sense of purpose taking root. I want to learn. I want to be worthy of what you've sacrificed. You already are, David said, but we'll teach you anyway, because that's what families do. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The colony expanded, new structures rising from the red soil. Earth sent additional support, but they also sent politicians who wanted to control the situation. David and Ember stood firm, refusing to let hope become a political tool. The child would grow up free, making their own choices, or the alliance between humans and Draconians would end before it truly began. The politicians backed down when they realized the colonists and Marines weren't going to budge. And when 3 more species arrived in system, drawn by Ember's calls, offering their protection and knowledge to the Meridian heir, it became clear that this was bigger than any one government could control. The Arxians came first, crystalline beings who communicated through light and had mastered quantum mechanics. Then the Vorlon, massive creatures from a high-gravity world who were natural engineers. Finally, the Ethereals arrived, incorporeal beings of pure energy who understood the fundamental forces that bound the universe together. Each species brought gifts, knowledge, and a willingness to protect hope until the child reached maturity. David watched as his quiet colony transformed into something unprecedented. A gathering place for species, a learning center for the most important student in the galaxy, and a symbol of what could be achieved when people of goodwill chose to stand together. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and sometimes overwhelming. But every time doubt crept in, he looked at Hope, saw the child learning and growing, and absorbing everything like a sponge, and he knew it was worth it. 6 months after that midnight cry, Hope looked 12 years old. The child had learned 7 languages, could operate complex machinery, had mastered basic combat techniques, and could discuss philosophy with the Ethereals while simultaneously helping the Vorlon with engineering problems. But more than that, Hope had learned to love, to care about the people and beings who had sacrificed so much for protection. That, David knew, was the most important lesson of all. The collectors attacked twice more, each time with greater force. Each time they were repelled by the combined might of humans, Draconians, and the new allies who had come to protect Hope. After the third defeat, they stopped coming. Word spread across the galaxy that Kepler 442b was under the protection of an alliance that would not yield, and that the Meridian heir was growing strong, learning from some of the wisest beings in known space. One evening, David sat outside his workshop, watching the twin suns set. Ember lounged beside him, and Hope sat between them, now appearing as a young teenager. The child had been practicing telepathy with the ethereals and was mentally exhausted, but happy. "I had a dream last night," Hope said quietly. "I saw the future. Hundreds of species, living in peace, trading, learning from each other, exploring the galaxy together. And I was there, helping them understand one another, bridging gaps that seemed impossible to cross." "That's your destiny," Ember rumbled, "what you were born to do." "I know," Hope said, "but I also dreamed about the past, about the first Meridian heir, thousands of years ago. They were alone, raised by a single species, and when they tried to bridge others, they didn't fully understand the complexity. They made mistakes, caused pain while trying to help." The child looked up at David. "But I won't be alone. I'm being raised by humans and dragons and Arxians and Vorlon and ethereals. I'm learning from everyone. When I start my work, I'll understand. I'll be able to truly help." "That's the idea," David said. "You're not just learning facts and skills, Hope. You're learning perspectives, how different species think, what they value, what they fear. That knowledge will make all the difference." "I'm scared sometimes," Hope admitted. "Scared I'll fail, scared I won't be good enough." "Everyone feels that way," David said. "I'm terrified half the time. But you know what I've learned? Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. You've got that in spades, kid, and you've got all of us backing you up. We'll face the challenges together." Hope leaned against him, and David wrapped an arm around the child's shoulders. Ember's tail curled protectively around them both. Above, the stars wheeled in their endless dance, and somewhere out there, civilizations that didn't even know Hope's name were going to have their futures changed by this one extraordinary child. A midnight cry had awakened a dragon. That dragon had found a widowed mechanic willing to fight for what was right. Together, they had protected a child who would one day unite the galaxy. And in the process, they had proven something fundamental about courage, about sacrifice, and about the power of standing together against any threat. The future was uncertain. There would be more challenges, more enemies who sought to control or corrupt Hope's powers. But David wasn't worried, because he'd learned something important over these months. Humanity might not be the strongest species, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But when humans decided something was worth protecting, when they found allies who shared their determination, they became a force that could shake the very foundations of the galaxy. And that midnight cry, that single moment when everything changed, had set in motion events that would echo through centuries. A mechanic and a dragon, a colony and an alliance, all standing together to protect one precious life. That was the story that would be told across 1,000 worlds, the story of how Hope itself had come to a distant planet and found exactly the guardians it needed. David looked down at Hope, saw the child's eyes drifting closed with exhaustion after a long day of learning. He smiled, feeling a contentment he hadn't experienced since his wife died. He had a purpose again, a family again, and this time he had the power to protect it. "Sleep well, kid," he whispered. "Tomorrow we start learning about interstellar trade agreements. Trust me, it's going to make combat training look exciting." Hope giggled softly, already half asleep. Ember rumbled with amusement, and somewhere in the colony someone was singing, their voice carrying on the evening breeze. It was a human song, but other voices joined in, draconian harmonics and Arxian light tones and Vorlon bass notes. Different species, different sounds, blending into something beautiful. This was what hope would bring to the galaxy, David realized. Not uniformity, but harmony. Not erasure of differences, but celebration of them. Unity that preserved uniqueness. Peace that honored diversity. And it was starting right here, on this distant colony, with a child who had been placed into the care of the most unlikely guardians imaginable. The dragon stirred slightly, its thoughts touching David's mind one more time before sleep claimed them all. Thank you, David Chen, for not turning away, for standing when others would have fled, for being exactly what this child needed. Thank you for trusting me, David replied, for staying when you could have left, for teaching me that being alone doesn't mean being lonely, not when you're open to connection. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, three beings from different worlds, brought together by fate and choice. A widowed mechanic who had found purpose, a dragon who had awakened to protection's call, and a child who would one day bridge the stars. Together they would face whatever came next. Together they would change the galaxy. And it all started with a midnight cry, echoing through the darkness, calling guardians to their duty, calling hope into being, calling forth the alliance that would reshape known space. One moment, one sound, one choice to protect rather than abandon. That was all it took to change everything. David closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of hope against his side and Ember's steady presence beside him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new threats to face. But tonight, they were safe. They were together. They were family. And really, what more could anyone ask for? A purpose worth fighting for, allies worth standing beside, and a future worth building. That was enough. That was everything. That was the gift that Midnight Cry had brought them all. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. But down here on this small colony, on this distant world, something significant was happening. Something that would echo through those stars for generations to come. Hope was growing. Alliances were forming. And humanity, stubborn and brave and utterly unwilling to back down when children needed protecting, was showing the galaxy exactly what it meant to stand for something greater than yourself. The dragons slept beside the widowed mechanic and the child they had both sworn to protect. And in that peaceful moment, as three beings from different worlds rested together under alien stars, the foundation was laid for a future brighter than any of them could imagine. A future where the midnight cry that had awakened a dragon would be remembered as the moment everything changed. The moment hope itself took root in the most unlikely soil and bloomed into something beautiful.